also start to share my presentation. All right, ready whenever you are.
Yeah, here we go. Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, whatever applies to you today. Welcome and thank you for joining us. As announced, we have with us Mr. Siegfried, project leader of OWASP OT Top 10. He will walk us through the project today. If you have any question, please don't hesitate to raise them in the Q&A section. Without further ado, Mr. Siegfried, the floor is yours.
All right, thank you very much. Maybe let's start with a short introduction from my point of view. As you know, of course, I'm one of the project leaders of the OWASP OT Top 10. Besides that, or maybe the main affiliation I have is being a security architect and analyst in the Austrian Federal Ministry of the Interior. Besides that, I'm also lecturing web application penetration testing at the University of Applied Sciences in St. Pölten, which is a small town in Austria. And with that, I will directly start into the topic, because the interesting thing, of course, here we would like to hear is the introduction of the OWASP OT Top 10. So let's start. A short introduction to OWASP itself. As you're pretty sure, well aware of OWASP, we have this introduction, small and little, but nevertheless, some words about that. It's an open community, so basically everyone who would like to participate and contribute can do that. And this, the basic aim is to increase security in general. It started from a web application security point of view, so very specific and narrowed down to web applications. Then the scope was extended to include also software security, and now coming from the IT, from the information technology domain, it's now also expanding to other technologies as well, like IoT, Internet of Things, and also OT, operational technology, which we are talking about today. Basically, the outcome of all those different OWASP projects is to provide free tools and documentation. So, for example, if we again think back to the web application security world, there is, for examul, the OWASP SEP proxy tool provided, which is an HTTP proxy that monitors and can intercept HTTP traffic. And with the help of this tool, it is possible then to interact with web application servers and also make security tests against them. Then there is, for example, the Choose Shop provided, which is an intentionally vulnerable web application server where students or beginners in the web application security or web application penetration testing world can then gain some first skills by actively use the things that they have learned in theoretical background then against a real target lab environment. Besides the tools, there are also some documentation available. For example, the OWASP WSDG or WSDG, which is the Web Application Security Testing Guide, which lists all those different web application vulnerabilities and how they can be tested and how they can be remediated and so on. And then there is the famous OWASP Top 10 list, which basically lists the top 10 risks, so categories of those different vulnerabilities we have here in detail in the web application security world. They are listed here and ranked according their criticality, basically spoken. So this should provide somewhat of an overview of which vulnerabilities are out there or vulnerability categories and how critical they are. And of course, this is something which evolves throughout the time. So this is always a work in progress. It evolves with the state of the art, leading to the situation there may be in the future some new classes or some classes merged together. So there can be new OWASP Top 10 items, some other ones may be removed and so on. This is updated on a regular basis. And something like that, like this OWASP Top 10 list, which is targeting web applications, is also provided targeting the OT environment with the project which is introduced right now. But first things first, what is operational technology? Maybe you have heard of it. It is used on many different application scenarios. It can be used, for example, for transportation systems. So see here railway systems, for example, also for distributing energy, for smart manufacturing, for smart cities, for example, so also in smart buildings, then in the medical sector, for example, those medical devices, or also in the pharmaceutical sector where you have some process automation where oil is generated based on raw oil and stuff like that. So you see there are very different application scenarios that you have with OT, with operational technology. What is it now? Basically, the core difference between IT and OT is that when you use operational technology, you are somehow directly interacting with the physical world. In the traditional IT, you're just in the cyberspace, so to speak, and with operational technology, you're really interacting with the physical world. And this core difference, this interaction with the physical world, leads them to specific characteristics in the OT world you have to consider. So for example, due to this physical interaction, there may be the possibility that risks arise that are against health of humans, so safety risks that could be arisen here. And then also the environment where this OT system interacts may be also damaged, so that it must not necessarily be some human lives that is threatened, so to speak. There could also be some effect on the environment as well if the OT system is malfunctioning. Then availability is something that we know already from the security world, but in the OT, availability is much more important than it is in the IT world. But I will come into the detail of this line of thought afterwards. Different operating systems are used in the OT world, which are not common in the IT world. In the OT world, they are existing quite a long time ago already, so approximately some decades, basically spoken. And there are longer operating and lifetimes with respect to the IT world, so it just takes longer until new devices are integrated and until patching is performed and stuff like that. From a core distinction of all those different characteristics, I will go into detail later about that. Let's have a small motivation why is this important for us. So here we have a list of known attacks in the industry against dedicated OT system. So it starts approximately with 2010, where the famous Stuxnet incident occurred, where a nuclear power plant more or less got attacked. And then we see afterwards, after this famous example happened, that some years afterwards, the time difference between all those different attacks starts to decrease. Here in the next slide, we see then that at least one major incident happens each year already, which is dedicatedly attacking OT systems. And those OT systems, as we have seen before, may be also part of the critical infrastructure. And this can also have, of course, a huge impact to society if those attacks are successful. Let's start with a short introduction of core concepts that we have to consider here dealing in the OT world and OT security. First, we have those two big protection goals, which are namely security and safety. You are pretty well aware what security is, that you would like to protect the system from being attacked, basically. So you would like to protect the CIA triad, which is confidentiality, integrity, and availability of the data in the system, basically spoken. In the OT world, one of the highest protection goals, or the protection goals, is safety. Here, the goal is to protect everything around the system from the system, the OT system itself, when it is malfunctioning. So since we have here those physical interactions with the real world, if the OT system is malfunctioning, this could then lead to the situation that people who are interacting with this OT system in operation, that they may get harmed or injured, and also the environment may also be damaged somehow. And here the protection goal is, as I said, everything around the system, basically spoken. And we have also security to consider in the OT world as well, but a little bit differently than in the IT world. Here in the traditional enterprise IT world, you have, as I said already, the CIA triad, which has conceptually this prioritization, where our confidentiality is the most important thing, followed by integrity, and some when very later is the availability. And here in the OT world, it's actually the other way around, where availability is by far the most important thing, then comes integrity, and then comes confidentiality. So we have here an example for illustration. If we have a web shop, for example, so coming from the IT world, if this web shop is not available for, let's say, 5 minutes, for example, then you just grab a coffee, you're maybe annoyed a little bit, and it's it, then it's working again and you can continue with your task. If you have this delay of only 5 minutes, which is very, very long in the OT world, here in an OT scenario. So for example, if you have the railway transportation system and the railway barriers react delayed for 5 minutes so that those railway barriers are closing, this then of course could lead to the situation that you have a dangerous situation where the car is actually crossing those railway trails, where in the same time the train comes on the railway trails, and then a collision could happen. And then if you're lucky, only the car gets damaged. If you're not so lucky, then it can be, of course, worse. And here also human lives could be threatened, basically. So the worst case scenario can be, of course, loss of safety, where people get harmed, or even worse. Afterwards comes the loss or manipulation of control, so that you cannot control your OT system anymore. And finally, the loss or manipulation of you, that, for example, values of parameters are shown that are not actually true. And this leads then maybe to the situation that you behave different and control the system different, and then it can have an additional effect on the control again of the process. We have here a high focus on availability in the OT system, which can be many different systems, but this is a shared characteristic. And due to this focus on availability, this leads us then to rethink our security measures and principle that we know from the traditional enterprise IT. So for example, how to deal with updates, because if you have to implement or execute the update process, then this in the process leads to the situation that the device has to install the update and maybe reboot afterwards. And this rebooting then takes time, which is exactly the time again where the system is not available when you would need it. And therefore, typically in OT systems cannot directly install your updates in the when it is operating. On the other hand, you have some systems which are operating 24/7, and therefore you have to think when you are actually going to install the updates. Typically, this is then done in maintenance windows when you have some planned maintenance, which is typically not that fast that you would install those updates in the IT world. So we are speaking here approximately, depends of course on the system and who owns the system and so on, but typically it's approximately done twice a year, generally spoken. And here then the updates can, during this maintenance windows, also be installed, but this of course means that in this half year until the updates are installed, the systems are vulnerable. But this is better than nothing, because some asset owners of OT systems argue, since it's hard to execute the update process here on OT systems that they just do not update at all. And if this happens, of course, your OT devices are much longer vulnerable against known vulnerabilities, and then it's, of course, easier for attackers to attack it in the end. How and when to test is also an interesting topic, because if you do security tests on an OT system the same as you would do it on IT systems, you could also have some undesired surprises, so to speak. So if you do some very aggressive, active network scanning, for example, going into penetration tests, or maybe also an aggressive port scan could be enough that an OT device starts to not react anymore, resulting in somewhat of a denial of service situation. And then again, we have this availability impact that we do not want to have at all. So you have to test on those OT devices again differently, maybe on a very slow automated approach, or also manual tests would be better then, so that you do not unintentionally block your OT device that you are testing here. Also, potential regulations could be an interesting topic here. Austria is part of the European Union, which also has the situation that we have legal acts to follow. For example, the NIST directive or the CRA and other stuff is then here relevant if you have to deal with OT systems or OT devices. And you have then to fulfill those requirements which are written in the law. And on the other side, to have, of course, still to provide the functionality of the OT system that it has before, and also guarantee those availability constraints and requirements that you have in your OT system. The life cycle is one of the core differences between the IT and the OT world. In IT, those devices that you have are typically not living that long. So typically after 4 years, you get a new device with all the new security functionalities and features that you can use and configure your device as secure as possible. In the OT world, you have a very or a way longer cycle for that. So we are talking here about more or less 2 times more. So here we're talking about approximately 30 decades or 30 years, which are 3 decades. And here, if you think now back, 30 years back, this is approximately the level of security functionalities that those old OT systems have. And typically, there were old communication protocols in use which do not support some basic security functionalities at all. So if you, for example, think about SNMP, V1 or V2, for example, then you have the community string, which is identity and authentication in one, so not really realizing authentication, and encryption also not really. If you have TFTP, which also do not even have the possibility to encrypt the traffic, and also you do not have the possibility to authenticate somewhere, you have to deal with those old protocols, which makes it very hard to secure them because you are reliant on that. And you have then those legacy devices which can only use those old things. You have here the supply chain, which is also a little bit different than in the classical IT world. You have basically 3 big roles in the life cycle of an OT system, which is first the manufacturers or vendors, so the guys who are building the OT devices. Then you have the integrators who are based on these OT devices build an OT system. So they are more or less putting all those OT devices together and make a network out of that. And then the OT system is here. And you have then the asset owners or the operators. These are the guys who are actually executing this OT system and use it. So this leads to the situation that the asset owner typically has more or less only read access to the whole OT system, and the integrator still has administrative access. So those two different parties have to work closely together. And this is done then with SLAs, service level agreements. And if you have to do some changes which requires write access, which could be, for example, patching the systems, then the asset owner cannot do this directly on his or her behalf only. This has to be done in cooperation with the integrator. And if the integrator say, I want to be sure and do not want to install it, because then I cannot guarantee the availability anymore of the OT system. And the asset owner says, no, I still want to have the app that's installed. Then the integrator may say, okay, do this on your own risk. And doing something on your own risks on a very huge, complex OT system, which is very, very, very expensive to operate and do some things there, is typically not done because simply the financial risk is too high. And therefore, there has to be found on an organizational, contractual point of view between asset owner and integrator a way that there's still some kind of minimum security ensured on the OT system where both of them have some different access level to. So to sum up, the focus here in the OT world is on safety and availability, not on security, which means here in this context, confidentiality and integrity. Integrity is also important, but availability still more important than integrity. The devices are hard to update and to patch, so it's very hard to have a device-centric security here in your OT system. You have long life cycles, so this also includes then implications of patch management, for example. You have only a few vendors or integrators, so you are heavily reliant to some external companies. And this leads then to the situation that, of course, the devices have still to be protected somehow. Otherwise, it's even more easy or easier for attackers to attack it. So here, the basic line of thought is then to focus maybe more on network-based access controls. So for example, network segmentation, or also network-based access controls over firewalls, for example. Also, physical access control is, of course, something you can always do, but nevertheless, it still has to be emphasized that these devices, even if it's hard to patch them and update and so on, that still it is tried to get some kind of a minimum level of security in there, because otherwise, if those other network-based security measures fail, then you do not have a second line of defense anymore, and the attacker more or less directly has then access to your compromised OT device. Let's continue with the OT kill chain, which conceptually shows how an attacker attacks an OT system. So from a methodical, conceptual based view. It has two stages. The first stage is very similar to the well-known classical Office IT kill chain from Lockheed Martin. So we have all those phases you know from the IT, and in stage 2 there is some specific attack mechanism going on, which I'm going to detail in a minute. But let's start with stage 1 as a recap from the IT system. Here, the following action has to be performed for an attacker to be successful. The first is reconnaissance. So you have to first get somehow the information of your target. Where are the weak links, so to speak? Where are the vulnerabilities that you can attack? The next step is then the weaponization, which is based on the information before, which vulnerabilities you have found and identified on the system. You have then to write some kind of malicious code, and this malicious code has then, this is then the next step with the delivery, has then be delivered to your system somehow. This can be done, for example, over a malicious email, so going in the direction of phishing, for example. When your malicious code is then delivered on your target, this malicious code has then to be executed on the target. This is then the exploit phase. So this can maybe triggered automatically if you're lucky, if some interpreter then executes your malicious file, or you are dependent on human interaction. So typically in the situation of phishing, you have, the appended malicious PDF. It is still required for a user to execute this PDF so that this malicious file then actually can run in the context of the victim who executed this this malicious file. And after the execution in this context of the victim, the malicious code can then install itself on the system. Here the goal is to get persistence, so that it is not possible with just unplugging the cable or rebooting the device, that the malicious code is not running anymore. And this can be done, for example, by using existing board resources, like depending on the system where you are, maybe some PowerShell if you are going more in the Windows systems, which are also used in the OT as well, embedded Windows, and also in new installations there are also Active Directories at some point of view used in OT systems as well, or Bash, Python, so also Linux, of course, and all those Linux distributions also use some shells which you can also use here for executing or installing your payload and so on. And then after this former step, you have compromised your target, but still have only local access to your OT device that you have just compromised. So the next step and the final step is basically to make a connection back somewhere into the internet, where the attacker then gets this incoming connection, and then the attacker is able to remotely control the internal compromised device. And afterwards, finally, the attacker is then able to do whatever the motivation behind the attack is. This could be, for example, analyzing new systems and data in the network, which could then lead to data theft, for example, and data theft leads then to selling the data. So a financial motivation would be then after this whole attack steps. Also lateral movement or post-exploitation in the network to get more control of the network, which could then lead to enabling, for example, the encryption of data, placing ransomware, which has again financial motivation, so that you are bringing your victim to the situation that the victim pays the ransom and you decrypt the data again and get money from the victim. When we're talking here in the context of OT environments and critical infrastructure, of course, sabotage could also be a motivation, where you just want to break the system so that it's not working as it does anymore. You really want to shut it down, basically spoken. And now we're coming to the OT specific stage 2. So here afterwards, after these things I just described, you have, if you want to attack specifically an OT system, since all those different OT systems are individual use cases. So even if you're in the same sector, every OT system looks different, and therefore, since you cannot more or less draw conclusions from other known OT systems, you have to identify all this information. And therefore, this is the first step then in stage 2, to attack, to develop again some kind of malicious code, but here based on the specific information you got here from the OT system itself. And still, this is done then offline, so on the attacker side purely, because the attacker has already the connection and the information is already exfiltrated, and this is then hard for the defender to identify because there's no interaction with the victim's system at this point of the attack. Then after creating the malicious code or malicious file based on the information gained, the attacker then has to again offline on his or her side if this would actually work on this system. This is performed, as I said, offline again, where some kind of the OT system that was identified before was reconstructed, digital twins, for example, might be a means to do that. And then if this succeeded, the next phase occurs where then this ISS attack is executed. And from a point of view, from the OT system asset owner, it would look like if they did not identify that this actual attack phases occurred before, because it's hard to identify because it's offline, then it looks like that out of the blue, the attack was successful. And then it's very hard from a defender's point of view to react because there was no sign that something came up, it directly hit, so to speak. That's the reason why we came up with the OWASP OT Top 10, so that we, of course, would like to prevent such situations from happening. And let's focus on this information. How is the OT Top 10 structured? So each of the top 10 items is structured as follows. We have here the name of the top 10 item, description, rationale, known attacks and examples for that, the mitigations and countermeasures, so what you can do against this risk, actionable steps, and references. And this is then done for all of these top 10 items. You're seeing here right now the titles of the top 10 items. Since we have already some kind of a advanced time and empathize more on understanding the core concepts, we will not discuss each and every one of the top 10 items, just highlighting some of them. For example, the unknown assets and undocumented service top 10 item. Here we have the situation that most probably, since you have typically a very big and complex OT system, that there are probably some devices out there which you are not aware of that they're actually existing in part of your OT system. And of course, since you are not really aware of them, it's hard to get them updated or managed. And maybe they're even to some extent availability or safety related in the worst case. And then it would be, of course, even worse if you're not really aware of that this is part of something which could interact with the safety of your system. So this is somewhat similar that you have in the classical IT with the shadow IT, but here we have again, if you're not aware of that, then maybe some additional, even more critical impacts, based off the blind spot that you have here. Another example would be the loss of availability, which is, of course, with respect to the IT world, much more critical here in the OT world, because the availability in the OT is used for, different layers, for example, for services, processes, and also real physical devices. And of course, we have also the discussion of safety here, which has also a relation to availability. What I would like to highlight here is not each and every OT system is safety related. There might be OT systems out there which do not interact somehow with human beings, and therefore safety might be not that of a big problem, but still from a financial point of view, availability is still also in this case is pretty important. What also was included for each of the top 10 items is then a reference to well-known standards and requirements, and also some legal acts. And in the more or less in the appendix of the project, we have then a consolidated comprehensive list of mappings. And for that was included the IEC 62443 standard series, which targets more or less OT security from different viewpoints. We heard before in the supply chain that you can have here the role of a vendor, integrator, and asset owner, and all those different substandards that are listed here are more or less viewing security on all those different roles. That's the reason why we have so many of substandards of them. And those concepts behind them, top risks of the OT top 10 are mapped to the corresponding requirements. Then also for the NIST special publication 882, which is an OT security standard for asset owners, but this has some requirements as well, which are conceptually from a methodical security point of view are similar, are also mapped here. Typically, those requirements from the NIST, this is a document which is free to use, so you can directly download it, which is of course beneficial. It also focuses more on an overview of the whole OT system, but it's not going that much into detail. This is different on the IEC 624 for free. This is a very detailed, comprehensive document and also consists of multiple documents, but you have to pay for this standard to access it. The NIST Cybersecurity Framework 2.0 is also referred here. This comes from a pure enterprise IT world, but the concepts are that generically written that you can directly apply it also in the OT system as well. And therefore we use this as well here as a reference. Also the MITRE ATT&CK framework for each and every of these OT top 10 risks, we also have examples for attacks where we then have also mapped the corresponding attacks from the MITRE ATT&CK framework. So some attacks are also modeled there and also some techniques which might be applicable. Then the implementing regulation of the NIS2 directive, of the European Union NIS2 directive was used here. Also those different sets of requirements, which again discussing network segmentation and secure operations and stuff like that, so that you know if you have to fulfill this regulation, for example, you can then directly see which requirements map which risk that we have here in the OT top 10. And finally, the ISO 27001 annex, but only section 6, where we talk a little bit about supply chain management, which is a pure organizational topic more or less, and there it's useful in the OT context, but not for the other topics, because the ISO 20001 is purely for the office IT and does not consider all those different characteristics and specifics I just introduced here in the talk, which is true in the OT world. Emergence and contribution. So what is the methodology behind the list of the OWASP OT top 10? It's based on public reports and analysis. So for example, the ENISA threat landscape. If you're not aware of ENISA, ENISA is a body from the European Union, which more or less dedicatedly deals with cybersecurity. So this is more an public authority background, so to speak. But we are also using threat reports from different vendors and manufacturers who are also doing some analysis how the threat landscape is evolving. Some of the manufacturers and also integrators and also security consultants have then somewhat different, somewhat same viewpoints to the same topic, but still it is beneficial to share all this information and discuss about that, so that we can maybe have a comprehensive view about the topic, because nobody knows everything. There may be a blind spot for everyone somewhere, and if we have all the information and thoughts and discussions together, we may have at least an as clear or comprehensive picture as possible from the situation. Best practices and experience from the industry are used. For example, some analysis report from Omicron Energy, which is a private company, and also Pentest Sensors from Lima Security, which is another private company. So as you see here, we are interacting both with public entities and also with the industry, so that we get a most complete view of the situation. And the contributors who are contributing to the project have the following backgrounds. So we have here on board some OT penetration testing and security testing experts, so more on the hands-on technical guys. Also the OT security architects and analysts. Then security management, also the organizational guys are present here in this project. Vulnerability research, also incident response, where we have to react to incidents. Also some people from academic research contributing to this project. And this is, of course, a living project. It will evolve through the time, depending on all those different trends observed in the OT world, which of course also leads to the situation that at some point we have to adapt the current top 10 items according to the new state of the art. Here we have a list of contributors for the most active contributors right now, which are of course the 3 project leaders, myself included, and some other guys from NIST Security are also very, very active, involved into the project. Thank you for listening. We have the release is not that far away actually. We released it in October 2025 last year, so it's a pretty young project actually. This leads to the situation that the release cycles are not yet fixed. It could be every 2 years or 4 years, depending on the feedback we are getting, if there is any change required, if someone sees something different, and we may have to discuss about the content or the prioritization of the top 10. And here I would like to invite you to also provide some feedback. It is managed on GitHub, the top 10, the OWASP OT top 10. And if you think there should be some change in there, please just provide a pull request and we will analyze your request and discuss about it and maybe include it. And of course, we have also some monthly meetings, which you can also find on our webpage, where you are always welcome to participate and discuss about the topic if you like to. And here is some contact information from my side. Of course, you can also directly, if you want to, approach me and go into contact with myself. And with that, I'm concluding this presentation. Thank you very much for your attention. We are not hearing you, Faisal. Still not. But in the meantime, I'm looking to the Q&A session part. And one of the questions would be, are there any plans to update the OT top 10 list? What drives the decision? So this is currently more or less under discussion when exactly we were going to do that. Basically, the approach would be to just gather feedback from everyone who would like to participate into the project. And when we got, let's say, some bigger amount of feedbacks, then we will of course make an adaptation. Some minor changes are always possible if it's just, you know, a typo somewhere, but if you have to change the content, or maybe it may be a wise idea to, you know, introduce a new category or merge something, then of course we will also going to do that. But then we are waiting for, you know, many different feedback, because it could also be the situation that it's just a singular perception, and if, you know, multiple people see it similar and maybe also some reports or also underlying this perception, then of course we will adapt and update the OT top 10 list. So more or less we're just waiting for enough input from a content point of view. And if we have this, which is also, you know, not just saying, okay, I think this is different, also with some reasoning and rationality, then we can of course include this then in the next version. And another question was how the community can contribute to the project. For that, I will go just back to the slide. Here you see a QR code, which more or less refers to this project site. And here in the project site, you're seeing the OT top 10. And in this project site, maybe I can just directly show it here as well. Here you see also the link to our regular meetings. So if you would like to participate when we are discussing about the OT top 10, please feel free to do that. And here you can also directly get to the GitHub repository, where you see then our OT Top 10 project. And here you can just state a pull request, which we then are going to analyze and discuss how we would like to include and implement this into the OT Top 10 project. If there are any other questions, please write them into the chat, so I'm happy to answer them. Okay, there is just a question gotten into here. What is the role of AI security in what is the role of AI in OT security? Does OT use AI in a similar way to IT security to improve detection and response, or is OT generally more cautious about using AI due to safety and reliability concerns? This is actually a very good question. From my professional experience before I started to be in the ministry, I was for a decade approximately as an OT consultant down in the private sector, where I also saw many different OT systems. And the second thing that you described, that typically those asset owners, so I audited nearly only asset owners, so I can only answer this question from the asset owners point of view. They typically would not like to use AI on such things due to the safety and reliability concerns that I just stated, but they observe that they have, since they're very reliant to the vendors that are providing those OT components, and typically the newer OT components are manufactured like this, that you have some kind of a, that you have to use cloud and AI technologies, which is provided by the vendor. So you do not have the possibility to decide, no, I want to use it offline, purely offline. They integrated that you can only use the OT device if it's connected somehow, somewhere into the internet. And this is, of course, very interesting from an asset owner's point of view, because then those network things are also not really helping anymore from the full perspective than it helped before. And then they have to consider how to use this then in the OT system. So they are forced basically to do that, I would speak. And this is right now something that all those different use cases, also all those different asset owners have now to think about how to deal with that. But coming back to the question regarding AI itself, there is also, as far as I know, a top 10 list for AI and secure LLMs, something like this from OWASP. And I think if we talk about AI itself, you can get there some information which might be interesting. And I think to some extent this maybe will also apply in OT as well. If maybe there are differences of application from AI to IT and OT or not, I cannot say right now, to be honest. I'm just also viewing at how this topic is evolving in the OT world, but from the state of now, I cannot say much to this, to be honest. All right. When there are any other questions, please feel free.
Can you hear me now, Mr. Siegfried?
Now I'm hearing you, but not that clearly.
Yeah, I'm using the laptop's mic.
Okay.
So please, if you have any more questions, please use the Q&A button. I believe no more questions. Thank you, Mr. Siegfried, for the first session. We really appreciate it. We really appreciate you accepting the invitation. And thank you all for attending and for the questions, and so on. The session has been recorded and we will share. Thank you and see you in the next one.
Thank you for invitation and also thank you for the participation. Thank you and bye.